So hang on, just restoring.
Green cat, Julian Pritchard. It's not going to be easy, but you know, we're doing our bit. And pulling back a number of disgruntled Labour voters. That's the important. You voted Green. Something.
So I've seen us doing
Just work.
should be watching. Yeah. Hello everybody, my name is Councillor Liz Clements. I'm delighted to welcome everyone to this, the March 2022 meeting of Birmingham City Council's Sustainability and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee. This is our last meeting of the municipal year. Sorry, you were right?
Sorry, I thought we had one scheduled for now.
Well, that will be in the new municipal year, won't it?
No, because we won't have had the AGM yet.
Well, it'll be after, I suppose it will be after the election, so for me it's the last meeting of the year. There are some, actually,
I won't be there.
yeah, so Councillor Johnson White in particular will not be here. So for me, this is a momentous moment because it is the end of the year and it's also the end of my tenure for 4 years of being the chair of this committee. So that's why I wanted to draw attention to it. Anyway, moving on. I'd like to welcome a huge cast of people that we've got attending this meeting. We've got Adam Tranter, the newly appointed Walking and Cycling Commissioner. Delighted that you're joining us in person, Adam. And we've got a huge cast of colleagues and officers joining us on Microsoft Teams, which I welcome. I think it's very good to have a flexible meeting, although as a councillors or members of the committee have to participate in person because it's a formal meeting. So I'm very grateful to the colleagues who turned up in person and also to Alderman Kennedy, who's going to be talking to us about the flood risk management report. We've got quite a packed agenda again with 4 substantial items. I'm proposing to give those each about 30 minutes. So let's crack on. I need to just alert everyone in the room and anyone watching that this meeting is being recorded and for subsequent broadcast on the council's YouTube channel. And if anyone wants to take pictures or record, they can do so, except that there are confidential items. There are no confidential items today. Bassima, if you could just update us on any apologies we've received for this meeting.
Well, Councillor Freeman, because he's not here in person.
Okay, so we'll note Councillor Freeman's apologies for the formal meeting, but I'm seeing him on Microsoft Teams, so I'm just waiting.
Yeah, I have turned up for a bit.
Excellent. So I'm very glad that you're joining us via Teams, and so I hope that the issues following the fire at your workplace are sorting themselves out. Sorry to hear about that. Best wishes to you. You're sorting that out. Moving on then, declarations of interest. As we know, we've got a number of standing declarations of interest, but does anybody wish to register a declaration of interest that relates specifically to something on the agenda today? No? Excellent. The action notes of our meeting of the 16th of February 2022 have been circulated with the agenda. I'm going to find one to see this if you haven't already looked at them. Can we agree those as an accurate record?
Agreed.
Agreed. And does anyone have any matters arising from those notes? Take the silence as a no. Okay then, so let's move into the meat of the meeting, as it were. I'd like to move on to our first item, which is an update on the consultation on the West Midlands Local Transport Plan, the core strategy consultation, and also an introduction from Adam, the West Midlands new cycling and walking commissioner. And I think on this occasion I'd like to hand the floor over to Adam and for you to talk to us about your role and what we want to do over the next few years to promote walking and cycling. So, what's yours, Adam?
Thank you for having me, Joe. So yes, I'm here to introduce myself. I'm here to explain a little bit about what I'm hoping and planning on doing and how I can, work to meet our, our joint objectives between the West Midlands Combined Authority and Birmingham City Council. So I was appointed in December by Andy Street, Mayor of West Midlands, to be the region's first cycling and walking commissioner. The cycling and walking commissioners have been I think a fairly new but increasing trend, especially within sort of devolved regions and nations. So London has a cycling and walking commissioner, as does Manchester and Sheffield City region. We've not quite cracked it in this region, and my view and my hope is that the time is now very much so to push on with this agenda, and not least because we have a significant opportunity through central government for active travel funding that I think is up for grabs for this region, hoping to bring more money into this region. But we also know, because of the way our transport has changed over the last couple of years, that there is a large opportunity to encourage and enable people to walk and cycle, especially for short journeys, where in Birmingham, as you will probably know, 25% of resident car journeys appear to be under 1 mile, and in the West Midlands more broadly, 41% of car journeys are under 2 miles. So these, while the car is a very useful tool, it is not always the best tool for the job. So my job is to enable that, and through through talking to people time and time again, that they do not do it because it doesn't feel safe to them, especially when cycling, but also walking. People who are jumping in the car, those very, very short journeys, have a reason that they do that. And often when we talk to people, it's not for the want of they want to do it, they've not been enabled yet. So we have a real focus on infrastructure, and I think that's a big difference, because while Birmingham, I think, has been, it's fair to say, leading the way on this agenda, the organisation I represent, I'm looking at how we best add value to the situation, and actually we've been rather focused on soft measures of nudging people and hoping people will change their behaviour. But we've not really delivered the kind of transformational infrastructure, or planned even the kind of transformational infrastructure that could actually make a difference for us to meet our collective targets. So I've been asked by the mayor to help accelerate things. So I have a big focus on delivery and working with especially central government. Some of you will know that Active Travel England has been recently formed, which will they originally used the phrase inspect. I think they wanted to be way more collaborative than that would appear, but ultimately work with local authorities and actually lots of different stakeholders to make sure that the stuff that we are building is good quality, and gone are the days where you might end up in a cycle lane that then ends up on a pavement, then disappears into nobody. We know that stuff doesn't work, so we need to stop doing it and make sure that the stuff we do deliver in the region is to the quality of the blue routes, for example, where we know that will have an impact if people for viable choice. ATE, as they're known, Active Travel England, are a newly formed executive body in the Department of Transport, led by a National Cycling and Walking Commissioner, so a colleague of mine, I guess, Chris Boardman, who was the Manchester Cycling and Walking Commissioner. And they are, for the first time, I think, having a real kind of close eye on what is being proposed by regions and local authorities, and are here to work with us to make sure that delivery is good, and in many cases want to be part of that process. And the stick end of it is that if councils don't want to work on this agenda, then they may well have their funding cut. That's been talked about in the department publicly. And if stuff isn't as high quality as it needs to be, they may also have their future funding rounds cut. but they would much prefer to work in harmony with us, which I'm aiming to kind of take a lead on for the region for the benefit of what we can deliver. So that's probably enough for now, but that's my brief introduction.
Thanks very much, Adam. That's I think a great boost for everyone who walks and cycles and wants to move around safely in Birmingham and the wider region that you're in this role now, and making those links that you're talking about. Has anyone got any questions that they want to ask Adam urgently at the moment? Because otherwise I think I might invite David and Alex to give the presentation and then take the questions after that, because I think it sort of fits together. It's a whole set of issues. It's a conceptual whole, isn't it? So let's move on to David and Alex, because I think some of the challenges that you're setting out about how we're moving from nudging people to actually switch on perhaps more directive are addressed in this paper as well. So David and Alex, are you ready to talk to us?
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair. I'm just going to quickly canter through some slides and then we can move into questions. So good afternoon, I'm David Harris. I'm Transport Strategy and Place Manager at TFWM, and I've got Alex Greatholder, who's one of my Principal Transport Policy Officers in my team with me. And what we want to talk to you about today was just progress on the local transport plan, the 5th local transport plan for the West Midlands. It's our statutory regional transport strategy. And as the local transport authority, the West Midlands Combined Authority has a duty to develop and implement that plan in partnership with the 7 metropolitan districts of the West Midlands. And it's an important document. It helps us form our policy decisions. It can help in planning functions, and also helps us make the right investment decisions and the case to government for things like devolution or funding. And since we adopted the last local transport plan, which some of you will know as Movement for Growth, quite a lot's changed in the world. We've obviously seen the CA develop and its own sort of set of policy frameworks, including things like the Inclusive Growth Framework, have come to fruition. We've declared a climate emergency as a region with sort of ambitious targets of 2041 across the region, and even more ambitious within Birmingham. And of course, we've also seen the impacts of the pandemic, which has had quite significant implications for transport across the region and how we think about planning and managing the transport system going forward. So we knew that the new LTP was going to have to be quite different to its predecessors, and we knew that we needed to start engaging quite early. So last year we published a green paper, and we engaged widely on that last year, and that was really to start sort of socialising some of the big issues that we need to face, not literally around things like decarbonisation, but also some of the more pressing issues that around inclusive growth and other issues that we really felt that transport strategy and policy had to do better in trying to respond to. And we had really big response rates to that, and better than any previous local transport plan. And that really rich sort of input has helped us with some of our thinking that we've brought forward into this new draft core strategy. And there were some really key sentiments. People clearly are acknowledging the implications of things like climate change and the transport issues that help produce those. People are aware that there are transport problems on their own roads, and they do want to see quieter streets and a change in the status quo. And some interesting things, and it perhaps alludes back to what Adam was saying in his opening speech then, was we are seeing a recognition of the fact that people are understanding that the status quo and how we do transport policy and transport planning is starting to change. And whilst there isn't consensus on the sorts of things we might need to do or when we might need to do them, people saw that perhaps using the terminology sticks, as in sticks and carrots, people see that sticks are more becoming more apparent as in terms of needing to be used to change travel behaviours to go towards the outcomes that we need to achieve. One of the important things we needed to do, though, was sort of play some of these issues back to politicians, and in particularly the leaders of the 7 Met area. And last September we had a summit with leaders where we played back some of these issues, and the key takeaways really were that they understood that the status quo was going to be risky. It wasn't going to get us to where we wanted to be in terms of our shared objectives, and that ultimately could be reputationally risky if the West Midlands was seemingly left behind in terms of a progressive agenda. They understood this case for changing behaviour through a broader range of tools rather than just the so-called carrots that we've always been talking about previously. And there was also a recognition that increasingly government, with its carbon change targets and also things like levelling up agendas, is going to tie some of these things back to the amount of funding that the region may be able to get through future funding rounds. And so it's important to show that we were moving in the right direction. However, that still doesn't remove the challenge of acceptance by the public at the ballot box, and this is an ongoing challenge for the new LTP. So we need to move forward in a way that we're taking people with us, and we're having those conversations about the need for change, the scale for change, and the sorts of tools and policies and interventions that start to help us deliver that change. And that takes us sort of into a new dynamic and a new way forward in terms of the new LTP. So I'm just going to quickly discuss and go through the new core strategy and how we've started to approach the way we're going to sort of deal with some of these issues. So firstly, we've set out a vision for West Midlands that's accessible, and you can live and have healthy, good lives without necessarily having to own your own car. And we've set this out in sort of a 45-minute region. So you could travel almost anywhere across the region within around 45 minutes to access work or education and so on. And then couched within that are what we call 15-minute neighbourhoods, where most of the important things that you need locally, be that shops, doctors, other key services, are located within easy reach by walk, wheel or cycle modes. An important point just to sort of reflect on here is that what we're also saying is some of our transport problems are not necessarily solved by transport interventions, and there's a role for land use planning, spatial planning, as well as the emerging realms of digital connectivity. And as we can see, we're doing this virtually. Some people aren't even in an office at the moment, and I think that's part of the context and the mix as we move forward as well. The logic that we've kind of set out in the LTP in the core strategy is that the 5 motives for change that we discussed in the green paper are key changes that, or key objectives that we want to sort of use transport policies to get positive outcomes on. And we see that in terms of the transport system, the 3 key impacts that we really need to have across the region in terms to getting towards those. So we need to improve accessibility, primarily by non-car modes. We need to reduce the overall levels of traffic on our roads and streets, and we also need to electrify the transport system. And to get us there are sort of 3 key kind of behavioural changes that we need to start making. So looking through the lens of avoid, shift, improve. So avoiding travel. So for example, using digital connectivity or reducing the overall numbers of trips that we make. Shifting travel. So continuing to improve other modes, make walking, cycling, public transport the mode of choice for many journeys. And continuing to improve travel. And that's not necessarily just electrifying the transport system, but it is also thinking about the types of vehicle we use, and in potentially sort of using smaller, less energy intensive vehicles as well. What's really important is behaviour change is critical all the way through this, and it's that kind of perception of the individual, the person, our citizens that use the transport system, and how they view the transport system and the choices therefore that they make around those the way they travel is really important. And we have to kind of think about all those things that shape and inform the reasons that people choose to make journeys and the way they make journeys and the times and so on. And we have to think about what we can do to kind of evolve some of those decision-making processes that people go through. And what we've tried to do in the core strategy is frame those within what we've called 6 big moves. And these sit across your standard kind of transport infrastructure type measures, but also thinking about behaviour change measures. And so we've got a whole big move around behaviour change for the better, which isn't just about information, but how we might start to do some of those more perhaps to some people controversial measures that start to change the conditions that change people's decisions about how and when they travel. And we've also got things in there picking around the land use and digital connectivity as well. So I think it's also important to reflect that the West Midlands isn't all the same. We have very different areas across the West Midlands region, and we'll work with local authorities to develop a set of area strategies that will sit below the core strategy that translates some of these core principles into a framework of actions that then can start to be taken forward. And this will complement work that's already ongoing on things like the Birmingham Transport Plan and the Delivery Plan. One of the key things that we've got to do is sort of ensure a balance between things that we can do in the short term and those longer term things that we need to also start planning for into the distance. And it's just sort of worth reflecting on the fact that if we're going to hit either, well, quite frankly, either the West Midlands 2041 target or even the national target, some of the change that we need to deliver has got to start now, if not yesterday. And some of those changes in terms of either reduction to car travel or shift in modes are quite heroic. And in terms of our transport strategy and policies that we've been implementing to date, we've not necessarily seen a wholesale change. We may have done in particular areas in terms of certain interventions, but across the piece, holistically, we've never really achieved those kind of changes in travel behaviours. So we've got a massive challenge ahead of us.
Stop you there, because that's on your slide there. That's possibly the most remarkable statistic there, because I've seen a version of this presentation a few times before, and the 700% increase in cycling is something to pause over, particularly when we've got Adam here with us. So I think I think you're setting up very starkly the challenge. And sorry to interrupt you, but
that's all right. And I think it's just going back to that point around a balanced approach. It's not just about all the sticks, and it's not just about carrots. We've got to look at this in tandem and look at the most appropriate solutions for the right areas and for the right people in those areas. And a really important part of this, therefore, is about ensuring that people understand the decisions and the choices, because if we don't choose to do certain things, then we also have to be honest that some of the problems that we're encountering are not going to improve either. And we have to be honest about the benefits and disbenefits of the actions that we're going to take as we move forward. And of course, we need to make sure that as we go forward, the transition is just, and we are managing that kind of burden across different communities, because some areas, some people will find it easier to adapt than others. And that's really important, that we need to understand that and manage that. But ultimately, we need to think of using the evidence and the information and understanding what we need to do to push past some of the decision paralysis, essentially, that's been holding us back on making some of the progress that we've not been making in recent decades. So in terms of next steps, where we are at the moment, we've got the LTP core strategy out for consultation now, and that runs through until early April. And those are the various parts of it that are live and online. And I would encourage people to respond to the survey and give us your feedback via the website that's on the slide there. We're trying to push out the engagement as far and wide as possible, and through a range of channels. But obviously, we're always kind of, we can't do as much as we'd like to, but we are trying to make sure we're sort of reaching out to as many kind of groups and stakeholders as possible to make sure that we hear their voices and get their views and make sure they're fed into the process. In terms of the work we're doing, so I'm talking to you now about the core strategy, and that's out for engagement. And I alluded to the 4 area strategies, of which we've now started work on with local authorities. In parallel, we're now looking at detailing out those big moves so that we can provide more a clear policy direction under each, and those will sort of develop in tandem with those area strategies. And it's almost an iterative process, because some of the learning and what we'll do through developing the area strategies will feed back into the big moves and vice versa. And so this is quite an interesting and I think, a new way of developing some of policy and strategy for us across the West Midlands. And then other parts, including the implementation plan and monitoring and evaluation plan, will follow during the rest of the year. Our intention is to take the final version of the core strategy back to CA board in the summer, and then also seek approval to go out and consult on the draft big moves and area strategy documents later on in the year, perhaps in the autumn. So that's an overview. Thank you very much for having us on the agenda today. Happy to try and answer any questions.
Thanks very much, David. Yes, it's interesting to get the update following the presentation that you and Alex made to us in the autumn. And I think very much on the eve of an election, you are really laying down a challenge to all of us as local politicians about how bold we're going to be on this agenda. Because if you look at the consultation messages, I think it's clear that a majority of people do agree that we need to reduce car use, but there's something about the confidence and the ability of local politicians to actually take forward that message and feel confident in articulating it. I suppose, like, from my own experience, I can chart a journey from standing in a by-election in 2017 where my party advisors swore me to not mention to anybody that I can't drive because I'm an electoral liability, to being in a position where I'm spending a lot of time in my own ward now, in a different ward, trying to talk to people about the benefits of a low traffic approach and making it easier to walk and cycle and to reallocate road space. But it's difficult for all of us because unless we bring people with us, this whole agenda of change is going to fail. So I'm going to open the floor now to questions from the members of the committee, but at some point I will also ask Adam to respond on some of the challenges in that paper that's thrown up in his role. I can see that Councillor Johnson-White wants to come in first.
Yeah, I read the report and there's a lot of really positive things in it. But I think, speaking as a Birmingham resident, I don't drive, so I'm totally reliant on public transport. I don't ride a bike. I have no plans to learn to ride a bike because it terrifies me, if I'm totally honest. I'm not eligible to even hire a scooter because of medical issues. I don't have a provisional licence to be able to do that. So I'm public transport orientated. And so a lot of people that I speak to, I talk about public transport, namely the buses and the trains. And a lot of the time, what comes up in those conversations is about the unreliability of the service. So when I was reading this, a lot of things that were going in my head were about how to get people out of cars and with us, whether that's on cycles or the scooters or back onto public transport now we're out COVID, etc. It's about making sure that when we sort of try and get people onto public transport, they know that the train's going to turn up, the bus is going to turn up when they show up. Even if the buses are 30 minutes apart, that when they get to the bus stop, the bus is going to be there, etc. And we've just started going back into the office. And I went into the office 3 times last week. Twice the train didn't turn up and was cancelled for a number of colleagues. And so it's about building that trust back, isn't it, into making sure that public transport is reliable in that sense. In certain wards, the reliability of service and the amount of buses that go through the wards varies. Various areas, and I won't name them, have a fantastic public service, buses-wise. My ward particularly doesn't, so we've had our bus services pulled back quite considerably, and that's caused an awful lot of casework where people have come to my surgery. So, well, why is that bus being taken off, etc. So I think public transport in each of the wards really needs to run the same, so that all the residents have got the same amount and the same level of trust. Because to have different wards operating differently, residents are saying, well, why have they got that and we haven't? So, and I know that the rollout of the scooters is happening gradually throughout the wards, because I've had a conversation about that. So there's that. I really am uncomfortable with the word sticks. I think that is not the right word. And then you mentioned about actions we are going to take, and then you go back to saying consultation, and we should have a consultation with the view that that the consultation will feed into what the plan's going to be rather than the actions that we're going to take, because that just sends, I think, the wrong message. The supporting local communities, I think I've touched on that, about making sure that all the communities get an equal say in the bus services, the public transport. My other big issue is about, and I think it touches on this report, and I think you've touched on it, and that is about safety. You know, public transport wise, personally, and I know a lot of residents will feel the same, wouldn't feel safe walking even a mile, never mind 2 miles, in certain areas. And we've got to start looking at that as to how we can make certain areas feel safe, whether that's lighting or CCTV, those sorts of things, and to get that area of trust back into making people feel safe. And that's not just policing, that is about, as I say, the lighting, the CCTV, everything that you hear in certain areas is not really making certain wards feel safe, and those sorts of things. I think we need some good funding for in order to tie this into, and I'm sure it'll come through on the consultations that you have, very much so about safety. And I'll leave it there because I'm sure the people are like that. So, thank you.
Any questions at this stage? Otherwise, I'll ask Dave to come back. And there's a specific question that you asked on the consultation. Can you answer that? Annie, that are you actually prejudging what's going to happen, or are you actually going to listen to the messages from the consultation, David?
So the core strategy itself doesn't actually set out actions per se. It sets out sort of principles in which we would take forward actions or policies. And so the consultation itself will sort of see if people are comfortable with that approach. It's not committing us to any particular, whether we use the language sticks or carrots, but it is setting a framework within which we start to make some of those decisions. The next stage of work on the area strategies that I alluded to will start to work with local authorities to look at the sorts of measures that might be appropriate in different local areas, based within that framework, that policy toolkit that's set within those 6 big moves. And that will be down to local areas and local people to determine the best way to move forward against some of the challenges that we've got. So I don't think it's predetermined. I think it's a framework that we sort of worked through based on the feedback from the Green Paper, then through with leaders. And obviously now that will help us shape how we go forward into that next level of work about what are the actions that we need to take forward, what can we do, and what else do we need to do to sort of build awareness, build consensus around some of the difficult challenges that we have.
Thanks, David. And then can I just bring Adam in just on the topic of behavioural change, because we saw in the presentation the scale of the change towards cycling, but also there's the notion of that if it's punitive, if I can sort of paraphrase what you were saying, Julie, that if the approach seems punitive, then you're not going to encourage people to make that change. And I also think the points that you made about accessibility and proximity or nearness of public transport is really crucial, because I mean I'm a lone woman, I don't have a car, I've been dependent on public transport in Birmingham for 20 years. I have to travel in the evenings on public transport, therefore it has to be safe for me. But in a lot of places I go, there simply isn't any public transport. That's the difference between living in Birmingham and living in German cities. I know I go on about it, but that is absolutely the difference between living in a big German city that you can go out in Berlin or Hamburg or Frankfurt after spending the evening out and know that there will be some means of getting home, not having to bring a taxi or to rely on somebody for a lift. So it's a real big issue about personal independence and safety. But I think actually where there is public transport in the city, it is safe and you can use it. So for example, I returned from the council meeting at Aston Villa by train at 8 o'clock, and that was fine. And at that point, the Cross-City line was functioning as normal, or as normal as it ever gets. So I do take seriously what you're saying. I'd like to invite Adam to come in, and then have Councillor Huxtable and Councillor Leddy.
Yes, so just building on Councillor, I think in many respects, regardless of mode of transport, they've typically, from my experience so far, being quite new to this, have been seen in isolation. So, typically, and this is something I'm keen on avoiding, but typically people like me would be focused on purely on active travel and thing, and the same would be true possibly of some of the bus colleagues. And what I've noticed from this local transport plan, which I think is really interesting, is there's sort of quite a big elephant in the room in terms of reliability of all of those modes, and that's short private car journeys. So I think that what has just the other day I saw that an entire metro line had to be stopped because someone had parked on the rail, for example, in their car. A couple of months ago, the whole Cornwall Road had to be closed off for buses because of private cars causing congestion, and everyone loses then. So I think looking at the modes, including vehicles, all as one, is something I know that Transport West Midlands is trying to do more holistically. And then in terms of safety, I think that's something that's really, really top of my agenda, both actual, I think we're transport, again, I'm not from a transport background, I'm coming at this from a totally different angle to most people. And most people, if it's statistically safe, that's good enough. So it's fine. But really, what we know that people won't do it unless it feels safe. It's, roller coasters are statistically safe, but it doesn't mean that you want to go on one every day. So we need to make it feel safe. And often, from a cycling point of view, a lot of focus has been on, rightly in some cases, things like I think there's two things, the canal network and things like that, which, I went to an event the other week and, cycled down the canal to at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was lovely. And then at 5 p.m, I won't go on the canal at that time because it's not lit, it's not safe. And the other part is that and this is why engaging with communities is really important, is a lot of transport planners, dare I say it, most of the ones I've met so far are all men, so they're not coming at it from a point of view of other people's learned and lived experiences. So I think that's why engaging with communities is really, really important. When it comes to carrot and stick, I think I think it's a valid criticism that often I say in a lot of policy things, and we use that phrase carrot and stick. But really, the main point of that is that the carrot is what we've offered so far, and even by making bus routes, increasing the volume of bus routes and buses, doesn't necessarily make them more effective if you don't tackle some of the other problems at source, which I think this is quite bold in that sense. And then just linking on to the 700% stuff, I mean, mildly petrifying, because it is, it shows, I think, the scale of what we need, the kind of change that we need, and linking to what David said about the cost of doing nothing, it's something that also petrifies me, because the Department for Transport's own data shows that if we don't do anything and just adopt electric vehicles, which in some cases appear like a good thing, road traffic will increase by 51% by 2050. So our roads cannot handle that. So we need to, I think the high percentages involved show what we need to get to, and we will only get to that by making them feel safe, and dare I say it, giving people the kind of dignity of choice about the transport modes they use, and making it as convenient. We need to make cycling and walking feel like safe and convenient options. Just for some context, cycling increased by about 400% from before the pandemic to during the height of cycling's rise in the first pandemic. So it is substantial, but not impossible.
Thanks very much, Adam. And I'd like to bring in Councillor Huxtable, followed by Councillor Leddy now.
Thank you very much, Chair. One comment I was going to make is the maintenance aspect, which I don't think has been taken into, because we're very good at capital schemes. We're extremely good at capital schemes. Whoever officially opens them, launches them, it's brand new, spanking new, it looks fantastic, and then it is never properly maintained. And a lot of people have told me one of the biggest bar to cycling is that they don't know what state the roads are going to be in, because, as I pointed out at the last meeting, and I think as the cabinet member agreed, a lot of our roads are in a very, well, they're in a dreadful state, let's face it, they're in an appalling state. There's the lack of maintenance, for example, of specific cycleways that are put in with their coloured markings. If you look at the road where we do the anti-skid surfacing, it's only ever renewed, or would appear only to be renewed if the whole road is being renewed. If there's damage to it in the interim, it's just the normal asphalt, normal tarmac that's put in. I remember putting in LED solar studs to increase cycling through Hazewell Park in Sturchley on either side of the path. Cyclists welcomed them tremendously. Other wards picked that up and put them through their parks. But when the LED lights failed after their period of time, no one was prepared to pick up the cost of actually replacing them or maintaining them. So the question is, how are we building maintenance into all these fantastic local transport plan schemes that we're talking about that will potentially radically transform the way we do transport, but if they're not maintained, people will revert back to their normal patterns. And I believe it was Councillor Alden at a council meeting a few months ago talked about the blue cycle paths and the Think Blue campaign, but the cycle paths have turned grey. They're no longer blue in some parts along the A38. So the key question is, how are we going to maintain what we build at a cost that is acceptable to the council taxpayer?
Thanks, Councillor Huxtable. And I think we haven't got time today to debate what's happened to local government finances since 2010. Obviously, we could have a long excursus about that. I'm going to try.
But we know.
No, I know. But I'm going to team myself and you on that and ask Councillor Lady to come in. But just one, if I may, one slightly flippant observation. People may have seen the pictures of Rod Stewart going out to his house just outside Harbour to try and repair potholes. And I was with my family in Essex at the weekend, and I can tell you that even though the roads in this city are in a dire state, where I was going around Essex, it was actually even worse. So I think it's a nationwide problem, and it is to do with the level of funding for local services, isn't it? But I am digressing. I apologise for losing the chair, and I hand over to Councillor Leddy to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'm a councillor in an area that's probably got the largest low traffic neighbourhood in Birmingham, and that's Bramwood and King's Heath, and phase 2, which was to incorporate a large part of Moseley into the Bramwood and King's Heath area scheme. The phase 2 scheme was rejected by a significant majority of residents living in the roads to be impacted. Now, in the presentation, you showed us that it's a stick and carrot approach. I want to know what the carrots are in real terms. How are we as leaders expected to sell the concept? Because someone somewhere is failing when the phase 2 scheme has been completely rejected. I do accept, because I was one of those that put my hand up when we discussed at Poole Council the route to zero, road to zero. I supported that concept, and I expect it to be followed through. However, each element of local government, whether it's Birmingham City Council or Travel for West Midlands or West Midlands Combined Authority, has a responsibility in regards to selling the carrot. Yes, we can wield the stick, but to begin with, it's got to be selling the carrot and getting the people to buy into it. We need an exercise of winning over hearts and minds and learning from what has recently taken place in Birmingham. because I feel that we are thinking that we can run well before we can walk. And if we lose the confidence of the residents to adopt to a more sustainable form of movement around the city, then we're all going to lose out. And it won't be me because of my age, but it might well be my grandchildren or even great-grandchildren if I ever get that far. Thanks,
Councillor Liddy. In view of the time, can I just ask for a brief response on from Dave and a quick is it a quick question now, Tim? Just well, I'm going to bring this item to a close because we've got 3 items to get through as well.
No, I pointed, Councillor Liddy quite rightly says, where is the carrot? Let me give one carrot that has what I consider as being very effective in terms of modal shift. Okay, this is obviously a pre-pandemic example, but I hope it will be as successful as one. And this is park and ride at our railway stations, which has taken a huge amount of vehicles off the roads between the railway stations and between the city centre and between other destinations. And I know we could go on about park and rides, but they have been very successful, in fact, too successful in some cases, but they have shifted people from car usage onto public transport usage, onto the trains. The trains were standing room only, where there were park and ride sites at peak times. But people actively chose to go onto the train by parking their car at places like Kings Norton, at places like Yardley Wood and Hall Green, and to go into the city centre. And we saw rail patronage, as I say, pre-COVID, increase significantly year upon year upon year until it actually overtook private car usage coming into the city centre. So that's an example of a carrot where people actually voted with their feet.
I agree absolutely. And when I was on Oxfordshire County Council, we voted for comprehensive park and ride schemes across the county, but particularly in Oxford to protect the historic city centre, so that that we still haven't got to the stage with park and ride that's linked up to our bus network. Can I just ask then for some quick concluding comments from David and
sure. So, I mean, Councillor Liddy's absolutely right. We've got a mountain to climb here in terms of that messaging, that narrative. It is about hearts and minds. It's about challenging, questioning, making people think about their behaviour in a way that we've not really been able to. And I suppose that's where the sticks and carrots thing comes in, because there are things that we can do to encourage people to change behaviours by improving a bus route or building a cycle lane. But there are other things. The sticks are then the sort of less palatable things that might make it less convenient for you to drive that 2-mile trip. As Adam pointed out earlier, we have so many short trips in the West Midlands. If we made some of those less convenient, people might decide to travel differently. But there's a point in all of this about when we're making these proposals and we're putting these to communities, that they understand why those things are being proposed, what the trade-offs are in terms of, if we do this course of action or this course of action, what actually happens. I don't think we're honestly that good at those sorts of things, and that's where we need to get better. And there's a sort of role for, I think, officers and members to work with communities and public to try and do this. But as I've said, it's a huge ask. It's a mountain to climb, but it's not something that we're ignorant of. It's something we need to keep getting better at.
Thanks, David. And then Adam, some concluding remarks, please.
Yes. So I think in terms of the revenue funding for maintenance, just to be clear that I agree, and I think the government's focus is very much on capital, but increasingly as we actually build a genuine network, local authorities are kind of going to go from that phase of cycle lanes being a kind of something that they've only got 1 or 2, so they need to worry about it, to actually how do we build how do we make sure that they're maintained, to the point where in the Netherlands and in Finland and other places the cycle lanes are gritted first before the roads are, for example, goes pavement, cycle lanes and then cars. We won't get there for a while, but it's a different way of thinking about it. In terms of the learnings about bringing people with us, I think I've been sat, and thankfully an observer for a lot of this, but have observed how central government, I think admirably in many ways wanted to try and help the messaging, obviously avoid public transport and give people genuine options and provide rapid funding for people to do that. What it's led to, and I think by the government's own admission, that the way that they've consulted, and i.e. the actual official guidance was not to consult, to kind of consult, put it in and consult thereafter, is, let's just say, not currently the advice from the government, because I think they've witnessed, and I've seen, generally and holistically, and when you look at the responses to the transport plan, generally people know that we need to make some bold decisions to make changes, and we need to not just go along with the status quo, because we've got all of the things stated in our transport plan, but we've not brought people with us. I think it's an important thing, and we've not clearly, always clearly demonstrated the benefits, and I think that's a communications issue. I also think just because, and this is I don't think of a fault of the way that the council operated, but as a kind of observer from the outside, I think the speed at which those low traffic neighbourhoods had to be put in meant that, currently I'm in conversations about across the region about other measures. And one of the big points that we learned is, well, you need to get some really good, solid baseline monitoring in there, because a lot of stuff is, there's a lot of fear of change, and a lot of it is, I saw this or I did this, and actually most people are willing to come with you if you can back it up, and with bus times, or back it up with baseline data of traffic flows, and actually, councils don't really count pedestrians to the high street either, so they ignore that bit. So I think getting much better data is one of the key learnings to help show the benefits of these schemes. And a final point on low traffic neighbourhoods, because they are an important tool, I think, is we will never have enough money to get to that 700% increase from building just pure high quality blue routes, nor would they be applicable for most roads. But what low traffic neighbourhoods do is provide at scale a safe environment for people to walk and cycle, and from a cost-effective point of view, that's sensible, but it has to be done with consent. And I think there's been a lot of learning since the height of the pandemic. It was like funding where the implementation of those things are going to take much longer and be much more co-designed and discussed. Is what I take from it.
Thanks, Adam. I think you're right, and David's right. There's a lot of learning from what schemes that were implemented during this, the initial phase of active travel measures. But I could say, as a counterpoint to what Councillor Lilly has just said, in my ward, I have a lot of residents who are very frustrated at the slow speed of the implementation of a low traffic approach across our ward, because people are very aware that we have inexorable growth in car use, running out of space for parking across most of Birmingham, particularly in wards like mine, where there's lots of terraced housing, and also we're in danger of asphyxiating ourselves. And that is my segue on to the next item, which is about the finding on our clean air zone. So I'd like to thank David and Alex and Adam for coming here and being this in person. This is a debate that's going to go on, I'm sure, into next year's of this committee's deliberation, whoever is on it and who's ever chairing it. But thanks very much for the presentation today, and really good to meet you in your new role, Adam.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on then to the presentation from Stephen about the clean air zone. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everybody for your time this afternoon. And it's interesting actually following on from David, because for anybody who's been here long enough, then you may remember conversations with David very early on in terms of the development of this policy. So it's a shame that he's not here to stick around for this. But so I've circulated a pack already, and hopefully you've already managed to read the report. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly run through a short presentation that really just deals with some of the headlines from that we've seen. Okay, so hopefully everybody should be able to see that. I think the key thing to stress with this is that this is an interim report. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Okay. So the first thing to stress is that this is an interim report. It represents the first 6 months of operation of the Clean Air Zone. And the reason I say that is normally with the reporting of air quality data, it's on the basis of an annual mean. So that's 12 months worth of data annualized. There's some additional facts that are laid onto that. And that just helps to even out some of those variances that we see due to weather and various other environmental factors. So a note of caution around some of this data. What this report also includes is what we're seeing with changes in terms of compliance within the vehicle fleet, and we break that down by category as well, vehicle category. And we also included in there what we'd originally modelled or projected in terms of what compliance might be in a do-nothing scenario in 2022. So that was in the situation where if we did not introduce the Clean Air Zone. But also we've included the data that we used in the original modelling around what we might expect compliance to be at the point at which we would expect to achieve compliance with the legal limit for nitrogen dioxide. So there's quite a lot of data. So, okay, so the first thing to note is that overall the volume of unique vehicles entering the zone day on day is more or less within a very tight window of anywhere between 94 to 105,000 vehicles, unique vehicles per day. And so we've been tracking that over time since the beginning of the scheme. There is seasonal variation there based on, so it dips during the summer, it then increased as we hit September and start of the new school year, and then it was steadily increasing towards the end of the year in this move towards the Christmas and New Year and festivity sort of period. But then once we hit the 13th of December, there was this sudden decrease in the volume of traffic entering the Clean Air Zone, and that the reason I say the 13th of December is because that's when the government's advice to encourage people to work from home came into effect. So we can really see that that cause and effect from those kinds of changes. Since then, we've seen the vehicle volumes continue to increase again. And at the moment, traffic across the whole of the network is at around about 95% pre-COVID levels during the week, and at the weekends it's at around about 99%. So those are the sorts of numbers that we're dealing with. One of the really important things for us to try and understand was if the percentage of compliant vehicles entering the Clean Air Zone is increasing, what is then happening to the percentage of non-compliant vehicles? Because if the overall vehicle volumes is more or less steady, where is that traffic going? Is it being displaced to the ring road? This might be quite a difficult couple of graphs to interpret, but essentially what that's telling is that there is no significant increase in the volumes of traffic across the ring road. And what we've been doing is looking at traffic in the run-up to lockdown, how that then dropped significantly with the first lockdown, increased, and then all those patterns that have been reflected with the other vehicle volume data that we're seeing. And then the other graph on the right-hand side shows the overlays inner city traffic, so that traffic entering the Clean Air Zone alongside that of the ring road. But once you break that down to the individual numbers, there is no significant displacement of traffic to the ring road, which is important. And this is being reflected, as I said, in that steady increase in the percentage of compliant vehicles entering the Clean Air Zone. So these are vehicles that are compliant with the emission standards for the Clean Air Zone. So that's Euro 4 for petrol and Euro 6 for diesel. So I'm not going to dwell on this graph because I think I've shared this before with the committee. Once you start to break that down into a little bit more detail by vehicle category, what we see is passenger vehicles account for around about 88%, 89% of all the vehicles, all unique vehicles entering the zone. 10% are vans or LGVs, so that's 98% of all the vehicles roughly entering the clean air zone. For passenger cars, compliance is now at around about 89%, so just on that sort of 90% mark. And what each of these charts show is where we are currently up to the end of December with compliance, that rate of compliance. The red line shows where we modelled compliance might be in a do nothing scenario for 2022, and then the green line shows what we modeled as the target level of compliance for each of those vehicle categories if we were to achieve our goal of compliance with the legal limit for nitrogen dioxide. So I think in summary, we've seen some very positive progress, and in particular with HGVs, coaches and buses, that level of compliance is really, really close to what we'd modelled it needed to be to achieve that reduction in NO2. And importantly, it is significantly above where we modelled it would be in a do-nothing scenario. But with passenger cars, again, it's close. It's very close to what we would like it to be. But we think there's also some really good progress in what we're seeing with the LGVs. So those two biggest categories of vehicles, a little bit more work to do, but it's certainly getting towards where we want it to be in terms of compliance. So in terms of that, the impact of compliance, that shift towards compliance within the vehicle fleet on air quality. So just to reiterate a point that I think we've made before to the committee, myself and Mark Wollstonecroft, is that the city has a network of monitoring points across the city. There are in excess of 90 monitoring locations across the city. Those are concentrated within the city centre itself, and we utilise three types of monitoring equipment for air quality. So there's diffusion tubes, automatic analyzers, and then indicative sensors. For this report and for the air quality annual status report, we utilise the data from the diffusion tubes and the automatic analyzers. We don't include the data from indicative sensors, and that's because the indicative sensors are not accredited through the through DEFRA, and so we've stuck with those monitoring equipment that is accredited. So there is consistent standards. There is a consistent way of collecting that data. So in summary, what we've seen is that within the clean air zone itself, across 37 monitoring locations, we've seen an average reduction in the levels of nitrogen dioxide by around about 13% between 2019 and 2021. And the reason that we're looking at 2019 and 2021 is that 2020 was the year of COVID. That's where we saw the greatest reductions in traffic volumes. And so it's an outlier. 2019 is effectively the last normal year of data that we've got. It's also the reference point that we used within the baseline report that was published in July 2021. So shortly after we launched the Clean Air Zone. So we will continue to use that as our reference point for change going forward. So within the Clean Air Zone itself, an average reduction of around about 13% on the ring road. Across 21 monitoring locations, the average reduction was around 14%, and then across the wider city, the average reduction was around about 13%. So there, and what this next slide shows is a comparison between 2016 to 2021. I think the note of caution that put on some of that is that the number of locations where we've got monitoring equipment. So I would urge a little bit of caution in terms of using that number, but we've also included the comparison of 2019 to 2020, albeit that 2020 was a bit of an outlier because of the impacts of lockdown and COVID, 2019 to 2021, and also the comparison of 20 to 21, just for completeness. The other thing that we've included in the report for completeness as well is highlighted those locations within the clean air zone, but also on the ring road, where we continue to have exceedances of the legal limit, which is 40 micrograms. Some of these locations are new locations that have been introduced into the clean air zone since the scheme went live. But again, for completeness and transparency, we've included all that data in there. And those are the headlines from the presentation. I've just tried to keep it as short as possible in order to provide as much time as possible for questions.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I think you did. There's some distortion and some fading in and out, but I think we got most of that. And that was a very clear presentation. And it's. I've looked at the report. It's very good to have that overview, because there's a lot of data in the written report. So I'll open it up to questions, and I can see that Councillor Huxtable wants to come in. But I'd say my main question on reading the report and reading and looking at the presentation, and particularly in the light of the last slide you showed, that is. The question that I wanted to answer is are we succeeding in reducing the level of emissions to within the legal guidelines, and because you've given us figures for the reduction in NO2 emissions, but I just want to understand how far are we still off the legal threshold, and I'm asking that particularly because of the new environment bill which has come through, which the government will be now thinking about setting new targets, and we know that the World Health Organization has set much lower targets for NO2 and particulate matter. So that's my main question. I'll allow Councillor Huxtable to come in now, and anyone else who wants to ask questions. We take the questions in a package, and then ask Stephen to respond afterwards. Tim, over to you.
Thank you. I have several questions, but first of all, I would genuinely like to thank Stephen, because every individual casework inquiry regarding the clean air zone, particularly from constituents, he's been able to give me answers, clarify, resolve. And it's not his officers, but it's Stephen who's emailed me. So I'd really like to thank Stephen for his personal involvement in doing this. So thank you very much. If I understand the last slide, and if you could bring it up again, I'd be very grateful, the coloured slide. Air pollution, not NO2 pollution, dropped 13% across the wider city, and dropped exactly the same amount inside the clean air zone, and dropped even further on the ring road, which is not part of the clean air zone. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
So the question I've got to ask is, if through doing nothing, as in the wider city, the clean air zone, we saw the same drop in NO2 levels as where we did do something, what actual difference has the clean air zone made? Because I'm assuming that as time goes on, people replace dirtier vehicles with cleaner, more compliant vehicles, because it's very difficult to buy now a non-compliant vehicle, even on the second-hand market. And so gradually, as people replace their cars, the cars that are being replaced are non-compliant cars. So we would hope and expect NO2 emissions to go down. So, and if they've gone down exactly the same percentage within the zone as opposed to outside the zone, what difference is it actually making? That's the question I want to understand. Is there and indeed on the ring road, it's gone down even further, where the charges of the clean air zone don't apply, albeit only by 1%, but still better than inside the zone. In terms of coaches and buses, I'm assuming the Advanced Quality Partnership Scheme introduced in 2012 has had a substantial impact consistently, because that was brought in, or one of the reasons that was brought in is actually to have a much more environmentally friendly bus fleet, coach fleet. So I'm assuming that has had something to do with it. And are there other measures like the AQPS we could put in place alongside the clean air zone that could push those compliance levels even higher? And my final point was looking at clean air across the city and taking the broader picture. How many places are we aware of across the whole city where the levels of NO2 and other pollutants like particulate matter are above the legal limits, especially as the chair has pointed out, the Environment Act is likely to impose new duties upon us. And I don't think that there's any disagreement cross-party that we all want cleaner air for our citizens of Birmingham. So where else in the city and what else in the city can we do in order to tackle air pollution and the substances that pollute our atmosphere? Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks very much, Councillor Huxtable. Any more questions at this stage? Okay, Stephen, over to you. And I'd like actually thanks for the way you've dealt with queries that we've all been sending you. I had a similar experience and you've responded very helpfully and quickly to constituents' questions. Thank you.
No, that's no problem at all. Okay, so what I'll actually do, if I can, rather than pull up the slide, what I'll do is I'll actually pull up a couple of tables from the report itself, because they help to illustrate in a bit more detail, and provide a bit more background to some of those questions. But I'll try and deal with each of those questions in turn. So if I can just pull that, just get that on screen for a second. Just make sure I've got the right one. Okay, here we go. Okay, hopefully that's on screen. It may not be particularly visible because I'm conscious you're in a very large room and that this screen's not as big as it could be. But so I suppose in terms of trying to respond to the first question, which is about how far away or how close are we to compliance with the legal limit. So this first table shows the monitoring locations, the 37 monitoring locations within the clean air zone itself. And what we've done on this table, which I think goes over to the following page. Yes, it does. Yeah. So what we've done on this is that the column 2021, we've highlighted in red those locations where we continue to have an exceedance above the legal limit. So what you can see here is that for the vast majority of locations now within the clean air zone, and like as I said before, we've included those locations that are new. We've got, I think it's about 7 locations now where we continue to have exceedances above the legal limit. However, those exceedances are significantly lower than what they were in 2019. Well, in some cases, not as significant as we would like them to be, but they are lower than what we would have been. I think, and so that was for the cleaner zone itself. So that's the 37 locations I was talking about before. On the ring road itself, so in terms of, and then I think across the wider city, there's another 17 locations. So for the broader city, we have, and this is trying to answer your question as well, Councillor Huxtable. So the reason you've got those slightly, I suppose those similar average percentage reductions, and it's always, it can sometimes be a double-edged sword with trying to average out some of this data, is that for those locations outside of the clean air zone, generally the levels of nitrogen dioxide were lower anyway, but they have reduced. So I think that's the first thing to state. But if you compare that to the location of the clean air zone itself, the clean air zone was created to encompass the greatest number of locations where we had identified exceedances of the legal limit for NO2. So it's not just a simple case of going, how do you know that the clean air zone is, why is it that it's 13% here, 14% on the ring road, and then 13% outside of the zone itself? You're not necessarily comparing apples with apples by doing that. That's the thing I would try and respond to that. But what you can see is that the level of nitrogen dioxide, just going back to this table here, the levels of nitrogen dioxide are reducing, and they are reducing significantly within the clean air zone where we had the greatest concentration of exceedances. And what you can see here is, even if you go back to 2016, those number of exceedances and the percentage by which we had exceeded the legal limit has reduced significantly. So I think that's the thing I would try to stress there. But again, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, I am still very, very cautious about reading too much into this data. I think it's certainly cause for optimism. And what we've seen in terms of that rate of compliance, and again, the other way of trying to answer your question there about the impact of the clean air zone is that when we did the modelling for the clean air zone, as I said, in a do nothing scenario for 2022, we'd modelled levels of compliance that were far lower than what we're achieving. So going back to your point there about not being able to get a clean air zone emission vehicle in the second-hand market, the introduction of clean air zones, not just in Birmingham, but in other parts of the country, the ultra low emission zone in London and various other similar schemes are accelerating that journey towards compliance. In the full business case, we had identified that compliance was happening naturally within the market. We had also identified that the levels of nitrogen dioxide were reducing over time in line with that reduction in compliance. The purpose of the clean air zone is to accelerate that change and to do so in the shortest possible time. And that is, using the words of the ministerial direction that were placed on the council, it is to create change in the shortest possible time. So that's what the clean air zone is intending to do. It is encouraging that shift towards compliance, accelerating that change within the fleet in order to bring those levels of nitrogen dioxide and the human exposure to that air pollutant and to do so more quickly than what would have normally have happened. And so the data that we have to date suggests that is actually happening.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I think we're
about sorry.
Sorry, did you want to carry on? Just finish your comments.
Sorry, yeah, sorry. In terms of the other measures, we are acutely aware that the environment bill is likely to bring additional obligations on local authorities, not just around nitrogen dioxide, but also particulate matter. At the moment, the levels of particulate matter in the city are okay with the legal limit.
We're having some difficulties. I think it's distorting somewhat.
We've already published. Sorry, I've also got a cold, which probably isn't helping as well.
I think it's a connection from America. I think we've got most. But I think for me, it's possibly I'm a bit sort of being simplistic, but I suppose I just have a desperate desire to know whether it's actually working. And what I'm taking away from what even though all the caveats you're giving, I am taking away a strong message that it is working, both in terms of the compliance of the vehicles and of the reductions in the levels of NO2. But you're warning us that it's too early to make a definitive judgment. Because I've been to a lot of presentations by West Midlands Air, where all that context of the new legislation coming in and the World Health Organization targets are there. So it's really important that it is working, because it's going to need to go further, isn't it? Tim, do you want to come in?
Yes, I don't think Stephen picked up my point about the AQPS and what other measures in addition to the clean air zone we could put into place. But the other question is, and this is slightly worrying, is that from what I gather from Stephen is that car usage within the clean air zone has remained pretty constant pre-COVID to post-COVID. But we know for a fact in terms of public transport usage that in terms of buses, I think the latest statistic was 77%. Patronage compared to pre-COVID, and trains were less than that. I think they were somewhere in the high 50s, low 60s. So the question is, because one of the objectives, as I understood of the clean air zone, was to see if this would engender modal shift onto cleaner forms of transport, i.e. public transport, that from the other statistics wouldn't appear to be happening, because of those patronage levels. yet car usage seems to have rebounded to pre-COVID levels from the presentation. And I don't think that's a point of the clean air zone and Stephen. I just think it's a wider point as a committee we should be aware of, because stated desire, which I'm fully in favour of that sort of modal shift towards cleaner forms of transport into the city centre, doesn't appear to be happening. People are still being wedded to their cars. But that was just as I say, a comment more than anything else.
I think that's a very valid and powerful observation, because I think this committee, we've held our own sessions about how you restore the travelling public's confidence in using public transport. And I can certainly say from anecdotal evidence from both local rail journeys and an intercity journey that I did on Monday, that the patronage on trains was remarkably low. And even though the number of services from Euston has been cut down drastically, the train that I got on was virtually empty, and I'd had to wait until the end of the peak period to come back to Birmingham. So I think there are all sorts of complicating factors that are to do with the impacts of the pandemic. But can I just ask you to make some concluding remarks, Stephen? I'm sorry to rush you, but we've got a couple of items that we still need to get through.
Yeah, sorry, and yes, Councillor Huxtable, I absolutely agree with you. I think there are some other measures. I think an interesting point would be to, for instance, with the taxi licensing policy, there was previously something within there around encouraging the adoption of ultra low emission vehicles. So there was the all new vehicles licensed after the 1st of January 21 were supposed to be ultra low emissions, but that was relaxed as a result of COVID. So I think there are a number, I absolutely agree. I think there are a number of other tools outside of the clean air zone or policy levers that we can use, and such as through the transport strategies as well, which then start to encourage more people to avoid the city centre, do something different, really, I think is the key thing here. And I think the final point I would make is that the clean air zone is just one thing that the city is trying to do to create a more sustainable environment, and it absolutely has to be seen within the context of the broader transport strategy for the city, and that's why the clean air zone sits with under Phil Edwards, who's coming up next, but also as well it is complemented through things like the future city plan and other schemes, and links into some of the work across the region as well. And I think that's the final point I'd make. This cannot be seen on its own. It's got to be seen as an enabler of broader change.
Thanks very much, Stephen. And I think the wider air quality strategy is very important. I know that as individual ward councillors, we've all been invited to work with schools in our ward on identifying at the moment one school where there will be an air quality monitor and a project for the pupils to do on monitoring air and understanding the impact of poor air quality on them, to hopefully be a good awareness raising tool for parents as well, and make them reflect on their behaviour, the extent to which they use their private cars. But thank you very much for that presentation. I think it's very interesting. I think it's very encouraging data that's coming out, but we're waiting to the next update with a longer term set of statistics. But thank you very much for joining us today. I really enjoyed that. Okay, you just mentioned Phil Edwards in dispatches. So Phil is here with Rachel Telford to talk to us about the Highways Capital Programme that will go to Cabinet on the 22nd of March. I've had the benefit of a briefing with this from Rachel, which I was very grateful, and she's able to talk me through the sort of architecture of all of these reports, including the financial overview by scheme, which I found very helpful. So over to you, Phil, and then we'll take people's questions.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. Just going back to some earlier remarks in the meeting, I'm going to hand over to Rachel just for clarification, because comments were made about male and female transport planners. So as most members know, Mel Jones is the head of transport planning, female, and 3 out of 5 of my transport planning managers are also female. So Rachel, over to you with that introduction.
Thank you. Okay, so the report that will go to Cabinet next Tuesday is the annual update of the Transport and Highways Capital Programme. So it's a 6-year rolling programme, and the value of it is just over 331 million for the 6 years, with just under 94 million allocated in the first year. So the programme primarily sets out how we will spend what formerly was integrated transport block funding, which is the funding from the government to deliver the local transport plan. Due to the changes in the way that that funding is devolved to us, it's now called Local Network Improvement Plan funding. It's essentially the same funding, and that is estimated at 6.225 million for the first year. So obviously the plan sets out to deliver the key priorities of the council's overall plan. We adopted the Birmingham Transport Plan last October, and now we're going to begin work on the delivery plan for that. So the capital programme will work to, obviously all schemes within it work to deliver the plan overall, and then moving into early next year, we'll have a delivery plan for the plan. I've said plan a lot of times there, sorry. And then also working to finalise the arrangements for the Commonwealth Games and leaving that lasting legacy for the city and supporting the continued journey of Birmingham's Route to Zero. So there's a number of schemes named within the programme, and they're detailed in Annex F document, a vast array of schemes. You may know something that the chair did highlight to me is a low portion of funding allocated towards public transport schemes, and that is because those schemes are delivered by our partners, TfWM or West Midlands Rail, if it's a rail scheme. So we obviously work with those bodies in close partnership, but the budget and the delivery of them sits outside of BCC finances. So that's why they're not represented within the programme. But obviously we have a lot of investment. We've got Metro, Sprint, Cross City Bus, etc. projects going on across the city. So there's plenty of public transport investment going on.
Great, thanks very much, Phil and Rachel. So that all the report and all the appendices were circulated in an email yesterday, on Monday, the 14th of March, because I don't think these reports are on CMS. Are they?
Yeah.
It's been updated, okay. No, and also just going back to your initial remarks, Phil, I'm glad you said that, because when Adam was in full flow, I didn't want to interrupt him, but I did feel that he was slightly underselling Birmingham, because I think we should be congratulating you on the excellent officers that you've got as a whole, both men and women. We've got really dedicated and extremely hard-working officers, but I'm aware of a number of very, very excellent women officers who I've found very impressive, and also actually Transport for the West Midlands, apart from Headhunt, taking quite a lot of our staff, also has a lot of excellent women, and not least Anne Shaw, and Laura Schoaf has gone from TfWM to actually heading up the combined authority, hasn't she? So I do wonder which local authorities Adam has been touring around of the other six authorities. So I'm glad that you made us think about who we're actually benefiting from as our officers. So, are there any questions on the capital programme for Rachel or Phil? Tim?
Well, I have plenty, but given times, I will email Phil direct about some of the more interesting ones.
And Rachel.
And Rachel, yes. Yes, there'd be equal opportunity questioning. I was going to ask one, but it's already been answered, because I couldn't find anything for the King's Heath and Moseley LTN, but I now know why.
However, if you look down the listing, that you will see an allocation for the Bourneville LTN. So I think there are different areas. I think there are.
I did spot that one, believe it or not. I look for Hall Green South first, Hall Green North next, and then Bourneville. Yeah,
so we're doing the typical ward council thing of being rather parochial. We're looking at the overall, but my company, because when I had the briefing with Rachel last week, is I had made the observation about the split of spend, and obviously she's right to say that the major public transport schemes are being delivered by TfWM and other partners. But I think when you look down the list of schemes, it's actually, it's a shame that in a way that Adam's gone, that there is major investment that's going into cycling infrastructure and all forms of active travel. I think that's very much obviously in tune with our Birmingham Transport Plan and also the wider framework that David and his colleagues are working on at TFWM. So I was pleased to see that.
Sorry, Joe. One does spring to mind instantly for comment, and it's nice to see all these cross-city bus packages, packages 1 through to 6. The one I'm particularly interested in is cross-city bus package 4, because at the same time as cross-city bus package 4, Sutton to Longbridge, we're also talking about downgrading the Bristol Road, the A38, and I'm assuming cross-city bus package 4 will use the Bristol Road where it's going to be downgraded. So not for an answer now, but how do they work in conjunction is a particular interest.
Rachel or Phil,
sorry, Chair. Just on that one for Councillor Huxtable. So the area of downgrading is, let's call it the former High Street corridor. So it's not officially now the A38, but that corridor is being designed to accommodate effectively segregated cycling and bus priority within that local centre. As you're aware, the main drag is now around the Sellioak New Road that was constructed. So it's certainly not been downgraded for sustainable modes or public transport, just to provide that clarification.
Sorry, I need to come back on that one, because if you're talking about the section between the new road, Phil, if that's what the local centre of Sellioak, then that doesn't accord with the description of the wards it actually affects.
I haven't got that in front of me, Councillor Huxtable, but
okay.
If there's something we need to look at there, I'm sure between me and Rachel we can pick that up. But I think the area I'm talking about, for members that are aware, will be between the Tesco near to the university gates all the way then up past the Sellioak station, what was the traditional high street. If there's an error with the wards, then apologies and we'll get that corrected.
I'm assuming, Phil, you should include Selly Park and Bournebrook ward, as that's the vast majority of that section you just talked about. And you haven't mentioned it. I do read them, you know.
No, noted, and thank you, Councillor Huxtable.
We'll that offline then maybe, but I think just from my perspective, looking down the list of the schemes that are going to be delivered in that 6-year programme, it is actually supporting the transition here that David was talking about. So very much to be welcomed. And the priority for bus is so important because as far as I can see, the main disincentive to using buses in the city is how slow they are really if you're trying to get anywhere on a deadline. So it's so important, and to see those cross-city routes restored is really encouraging. Okay, so if there's no more queries on that, I want to thank Rachel for preparing an excellent report, and for Rachel and Phil for coming and presenting it to us. And thank you for waiting so long to talk to us about it as well. Thank you very much. And we're now on to the final item of the agenda, which is our annual flood risk management annual report. And again, thank you to Hannah and to Honorary Alderman Tony Kennedy for waiting so long and so patiently to get to this item on the agenda, because this is a really important annual report that we take on this committee. So I'd like to hand over to you, and I understand from Tony that Hannah's going to lead off. Is that right?
Yes, and I'll sweep up if it's necessary, or if there's anything political that arises.
Okay, thank you. Over to you then, Hannah.
Brilliant, thank you. Can you see the presentation up on my screen, first of all?
Yes.
Brilliant, thank you. So good afternoon and welcome to the Flood Risk Management Scrutiny. My name is Hannah Hogan. I'm Flood Risk Manager and I've been in post since January 2020. My previous experience includes over a decade at the Environment Agency, 3 years at a neighbouring authority, and I've also worked for a well-known environmental consultancy. I'm chartered with the Chartered Institution of the Water Water and Environmental Management, a chartered environmentalist with the Society of the Environment, and also a member of the International Water Association. So, thank you for the opportunity today to showcase the varied and ongoing work that's been undertaken in 2021, often under quite difficult circumstances. The presentation will focus on the aspects shown here and offer an update to our work and the support that we offer to both Birmingham City Council teams and our partners. So back in the good old days of 2019, Birmingham announced a climate emergency and made a commitment, as detailed earlier, to reduce the city's carbon emissions. The impact of climate change or changing extreme weather events, including flooding, droughts and heat wave, are likely to be profound, with increasing risks to both life and property. We're mindful of the changes and impacts upon the infrastructure, people and places, and we work with our flood risk contractors and PFI partner to preemptively clear and monitor high risk structures and assets, which would have a significant effect on flood risk. In the background, we also monitor weather alerts and we respond to flood alerts and flood warnings. The team also provides an out of hours duty and service during evenings and weekends, where the names of the appropriate staff member or members are shared with the control room. And this works as a contact for elected members, residents and other teams in case of rainfall or flood. Also, when health and safety and resources allow, we also actively monitor flood levels on site. This can also be done via cameras and online level gauges. And we work alongside other organisations such as the Environment Agency, the Emergency Services and Severn Trent Water. So to go on to the Llfa roles and responsibilities, we've continued to deliver schemes and services throughout 2021 with public events and meetings held both in person and virtually. As lead local flood authority, we respond to an influx of planning applications and help inform sustainable drainage, and to also mitigate against all sources of flood risk. And this includes sites relating to the Commonwealth Games, HS2 and sustainable urban extensions. Over the pipeline of schemes put forward, the lead local flood authority envisaged sizable investment in Birmingham, and we will look to attract external and internal contributions through the submittal of business cases to the Environment Agency or other government departments. We've also been advising on works on the interest of safety and on-site emergency plans for BCC-owned reservoirs, and to ensure that BCC fulfils obligations under the Reservoirs Act 1975. The local flood risk management strategy has been postponed due to the EA's national strategy. We then had newer guidance in 2021 from the Local Government Association, and there's also been recent consultations on the flood risk management plans, known as FRUMPs, and the river basement management plans. The update will include changes to the climate change allowances, as were passed on to us in late 2021. It will be supported by an updated habitats regulation assessment and strategic environmental assessment in light of new DEFRA and National England advice. Oh, apologies. We hold the Strategic Board and the Birmingham Water Group meetings. We take a partnership approach and have regular meetings involving the City Council, neighbouring councils, the Environment Agency, Severn Trent Water and Kia to try to address all sources of flooding. And we endeavour to find cost-effective alleviation solutions. In our 6-year programme, I think we're being especially ambitious. We have 27 projects put forward in the new 6-year pipeline, and areas are targeted on a risk-based approach with the best chances of attracting funding. The pipeline is anticipating to better protect approximately 700 residential and commercial properties. The programme is currently valued at 5 million, although that can deviate quite significantly depending upon the business cases and the range of funding available. And all of these business cases are then assured by both ourselves and the Environment Agency. So one of our major projects this year, the flood risk team and our flood risk contractors have been on site to deliver the Environment Agency scheme at First Avenue, Selly Park North, to fully remove 2 weirs and the partial removal of 2 others on the River Ray. The work was delivered, as I said, by our contractors, with site management taken by our team on behalf of the Environment Agency, because we were a cost-effective and willing partner. It included renaturalisation of the channel with the importation of gravels. Hay bales were used to capture the silt, and we had site supervision from beginning to end. The benefits of this will be to lower water levels and refurnish the Ray with additional capacity. It will also help to decrease flood risk, and it will help improve fish passage, and improve habitats. Our contractors have also finished bund works at Eastern Avenue in Selly Park, and we've taken on a very high number of emergency and urgent health and safety works together with our colleagues in leisure and parks. We're also undertaking flood defence works and watercourse flow improvements and creating flood storage areas along the Hilltop Brook in Handsworth Wood. This involves the breakout and rebuild of existing wing walls and to accommodate the installation of 2 bends on the approach to a culvert with a new concrete surround to form a new inlet structure. The installation of a new raking trash screen, to the new inlet structure, which will enable a lengthsman to easily rake away debris on the screen, which will lessen flood risk. We have provided and installed non-return flat valves to an existing outfall, and constructed a new brick flood wall and water tightening measures to an existing concrete panels at Sunningdale Close in Handsworth Wood. Our proposed works in this area will be the shallow excavation of existing grounds to form large natural earth depressions, which will act as a storage area adjacent to the watercourse. It will involve the construction of storm overflow pipes to divert storm flows away from the existing watercourse into the temporary storage area, with this water to be released slowly back into the watercourse by new outlet structures. Moving on to another slightly smaller scheme, but equally as important, Pereira Road allotments in Harbour. We've stabilised the existing eroded sections using large boulder stones, as can be seen along the bank there. We've cleared the channel of major blockages, excavated the channel downwards to restore the channel capacity, which will lessen flood risk. And what else? We've undertaken a structural survey to the culverts. We've repaired fractures and cracks to the existing brick culvert and replaced any missing defective brickwork. As part of the scheme, there's also been the carrying out of localised underpinning works to eroded section of the culvert and installation of a new bridge to allow access. Right, Selly Park North and South schemes led by the Environment Agency are now complete. The Environment Agency worked in partnership with Calthorpe Estates, the City Council and other organisations to develop the scheme to help reduce the risk of flooding to circa 100 properties. The scheme is now fully operational, and the Environment Agency, Severn Trent Water and the flood risk team are now continuing to look at the residual risk of surface water flooding, especially on and near the Pershore Road. Selly Park South scheme was a £2.4 million scheme, and the EA worked alongside St Andrews Healthcare and Birmingham City Council to develop a scheme to reduce the flooding to yet another 220 properties. This involved the construction of an embankment on public open space immediately upstream of Dogpool Lane to help hold water back in extreme heavy rainfall events, and bank levels were also raised downstream of the bridge to reduce the risk of floodwater getting into properties. To go on to a couple of the studies ongoing at the moment, The Upper Bourne Brook and the Lower Ray and Bourne, the Environment Agency, Severn Trent Water and the City Council are working together on a catchment-wide study to understand the flood risk and to develop flood mitigation options for the Upper Bourne Brook catchment. And the EA are continuing to work on a catchment-wide study to understand the flood risk and to develop flood mitigation for the Bourne and Lower Ray catchment. This is currently at strategic outline case development stage and been funded by government grant and aid monies. And this will help find a preferred way forward for a viable, cost-effective scheme. Oh, no. Sorry. The Environment Agency currently have two schemes being built at the moment, Pereira and Witton and Bromford. Pereira and Witton will better protect 1,400 properties at risk, including 950 residentials. And most of this will focus upon the flood event of 2018. Construction work for phase 2 started in January 2018. And the work here will increase flood storage capacity in the Sandwell Valley and is hoping to be expected, well, certainly within the next year. And Birmingham made a sizable contribution to the scheme. In terms of Bromford, that scheme will better protect, when finished, more than 900 homes and businesses, and it has also attracted a sizable contribution from Homes England. The scheme will involve raising flood walls and constructing new ones with earth embankments, and a cycling route to be provided along the south bank, linking up with the existing networks at Bromford Road and Chester Road. Ongoing delays mean that there's been substantial slippage in the delivery of the scheme, but the contractors from the EA are endeavouring. In terms of consenting works on ordinary watercourses, as lead local flood authority, we are the authority responsible for regulating activities on ordinary watercourses in Birmingham. And as a result, the City Council is legally responsible for dealing with ordinary watercourse land drainage consents. In 2021, 15 applications were received for either in-channel works or for works within bylaw distance. And the team also advise on internal works and HS2 crossings and exempt activities. In terms of the works funded by the Flood Risk Management revenue budgets, I won't go into detail with all of these, but we have undertaken a debris run on the ordinary watercourse section of the River Cole from Foreman's Road to Nethercote Gardens. We've undertaken works on the Plants Brook, the Turbs Green Brook and the tributary to the Bourne Brook. Citywide, we've undertaken flood asset management works and our contractors to all strategic grills, which will have a significant impact on flood risk. As mentioned earlier, we're undertaking a lot of work on Handsworth Wood Brook up near Sunningdale Close. And our contractors also go out regularly on a cyclical basis and inspect strategic and clear strategic culvert structures. This is quite a hefty slide, so I won't go into everything in detail here, and I won't repeat what is in the report, but you can see that the Flood Risk Management team and our contractors have completed a huge amount of work for other departments, all of which are not necessarily deemed statutory works, but they will all have a discernible benefit for improving flood risk, ecology, biodiversity, and to try and help safeguard from pollution. So for the local planning authority, we undertake sustainable drainage and permeability suitability checks to inform Llfa sites. And we've processed approximately 20 pre-application requests to advise drainage for future planning applications. We also advise on the appropriateness of development sites put forward for development, any drainage issues that are raised and surface water drainage. The team also advise where needed on policy documents, neighbourhood plans, supplementary planning documents and environmental improvement schemes and proposals. You can see we've undertaken works for housing on Fisher Close and Merritt's Brook. Also on behalf of bereavement at Handsworth Cemetery. We've undertaken a lot of works on behalf of leisure and parks, especially advising on Alexander Stadium regarding the reconstruction of the stadium in preparation for the Commonwealth Games, and to inform the additional drainage and effect on the reservoir and dam. You can see there Ward End Pool, Geranium Close, Tennell Lane, Rose Hill, Valley Parkway, Handsworth Park Pool, reprofiling and desilting, which will help water quality. And we also help advise on Section 38s, highway suds, and the Plants Brook, where we restored flood channel capacity by evacuation, cutting back the vegetation and removing major blockages. Another part of our role is all the reservoir works. We have statutory duties on behalf of BCC Leisure under the Reservoir Act 1975 under Section 10 and 12, and we and our contractors undertake inspections citywide. We've taken a lot of works in the interests of safety, as shown here: Llfa Reservoir, Longmoor, Perry Pool, Powers Reservoir, Salford, Swanshurst. And especially on Windley Reservoir, we've had to undertake a topographical survey of the dam and construction of a reinforced concrete apron and repairs. Our contractors undertake repair works to auxiliary spillways and to make sure that the reservoirs, as usually fairly old and ancient assets, are in a fit and proper condition, and that the risk is minimised to all of those downstream. Going on to our statutory planning role, we are statutory consultee for surface water on major developments, which is 10 dwellings or more, or the equivalent in non-residential or mixed development. The local planning decisions are expected to ensure that sustainable urban drainage for the management of runoff are put in place unless demonstrated to be inappropriate, and that all schemes should be designed to ensure that the maintenance and operation requirements are economically proportionate and pinned down in perpetuity for the lifetime of the development. As you can see, the numbers have increased over the years, and unfortunately we weren't able to access the numbers for 2021 as yet, probably because the application numbers are so high. But they're going up year by year. Going on to the last slide, if I may. We had an internal audit throughout 2020 and 2021, and we were audited for all aspects across the service, including but not limited to all of the points detailed there. No major concerns were issued or were found by virtue of the audit, and the team received recommendations on how we can further improve the service, given that, as you can see, our incredibly varied nature and the enormous volume of our work. We currently only have 5 members of staff carrying a vacancy, but we have delivered all of this throughout an ongoing pandemic in difficult financial circumstances. And with that, unless Tony would like to, Alderman Kennedy would like to make any further comments, I'd like to invite any questions that you may have, and thank you for your time today.
Yeah, that's fine. Just, I won't dwell on any detail on this, it's being raised, but something like the Sandal Valley scheme contains a 1.7 million cubic metre storage capacity. So some of these schemes are enormous, and many are run by the Environment Agency. There have been a number of delays in the Bromford scheme, which Liam Byrne has raised in Parliament with the ministers, and that's down to the Environment Agency, not us.
Thanks, Alderman Kennedy. Yes, I'm sure people will come back to you with any questions if they arise during the discussion. And thank you very much, Hannah, for that really excellent presentation on another really busy year's work. I remember your presentation from last year, and again how how much work had gone on through those difficult times of the pandemic. And if I may say so, you're another example of, a very really excellent woman officer in this area of the council service. So it's very glad that I'm very glad that you're working with us. Councillor Huxtable.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I would reiterate your comments that it was an excellent, very detailed, very thorough report. And again, like with Stephen earlier, I'd like to place on record my personal thanks to Hannah for all the individual casework issues that she's been of help with over the last year in my own ward. And I'm going to refer to some of those, but first I believe I probably should declare that I'm involved with the Friends of Tritford Park for declaration purposes, because I'm going to raise Tritford Park. I don't want to get myself into any trouble. Let's take Tritford Park first of all. I understand that Section 12 Reservoir Act works are ongoing at Tritford Park, which has involved a lot of trees, unfortunately, being cut down. I've been assured they were absolutely essential to ensure the structural integrity of the dam, because if the dam fails, we're in a whole heap of problems given the cubic metres of water held in Tritford Park. What I haven't secured an assurance with is the replacement works for those trees from a ecological biodiversity, and I wonder if Hannah will take that away and come back to me. I'd be very grateful regarding that. As I say, I am involved with the Friends of Tritford Park, and that issue has been raised with me. My main issue is my lack of progress, my disappointment with the lack of progress over the River Cole partnership scheme. I see a huge amount of work going on along the River Ray. I read where we are in paragraph 6.4 of the river in terms of the River Cole, and that we have put forward various schemes to the EA, but it's that pesky contributions in terms of the flood defence grant in aid contribution. But I would just like to, and I know Hannah has been out personally and met with businesses along the River Cole and has been very proactive and very helpful. So this certainly is not a criticism of any officers about it. But I would like renewed efforts in trying to get a very workable River Cole partnership scheme in terms of projects going forward, and involvement of local members along the River Cole. It goes through many of our wards in South and East Birmingham, my own ward being one, and I see all the other stakeholders being involved, but what I didn't read in the report is ward councillors being involved, and the feedback from them and the views from local residents. And indeed, only in the last week, Hannah has been dealing very effectively with one of my constituents on Cole Valley Road itself being flooded in terms of her back garden. So it is becoming an increasing issue. And on the River Cole, and linking it up to another part of the report, I see Ripple Road is going in Sturchley, has had some of its floodgates renewed. I've been asking housing, because this is council housing along Brookwood Avenue in Hall Green, adjacent to the River Cole, for floodgates to be installed to the 6 properties between numbers 2 and 12. And I'm not getting anywhere. And as I say, they're owned by housing. I've taken my my new housing manager out. I took her out, and literally a week later, one of the properties was flooded again. And, I know I helped them get it installed in Ripple Road in Sturchley. I would like housing to take on board numbers 2 to 12, Brookwood Avenue, and see if working with BCC Housing, we can get some floodgates similar to those in Ripple Road, and I think that would be very helpful. These residents did suffer from the floods in May 2018. It caused extensive damage to some of the properties, and it's a shame matters haven't been progressed. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Huxtable. And Hannah, would you like to come back on Councillor Huxtable's question about progress towards a strategy for the River Cole?
Yes, of course. So in previous years, the Environment Agency and Birmingham City Council have looked at flood alleviation on the Cole. From memory, there was a very sizable funding gap in the terms of millions. So that was for a capital scheme. The Environment Agency are now going back to model the River Cole to see if they can get any other additional benefits or damages that they can feed into a business case. The City Council have recently put in a sizable bid for property level flood resilience for properties in Spark Hill and beyond. The fear is that because you can get fluvial, which are river outcome measures, and surface water outcome measures, the fear is that if Birmingham City Council were to go off and do a property flood resilience scheme, that may prejudice any future delivery of a wider alleviation scheme on the Cole. However, as this could be years in the making, we need to give the residents and communities out there some peace of mind, some personal resilience and some flood resilience to help them cope with both the surface water and the flood water from the River Cole. We're looking to progress that with the Environment Agency. I think the new programme, although we've got a 6-year delivery programme, I think the 2022-23 programme will be firmed up in perhaps April, so we'll be in a better position after liaising with the Environment Agency about how much funding could be available. There's also possible other funding streams that will be made available either by local or central government. So that's something that we could utilise, especially for frequently flooded communities. In terms of Councillor Huxtable's point on, was it Brookwood Avenue?
It was.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we're more than happy to work with housing colleagues to try to get flood guards out there. Property flood resilience can usually be installed, subject to supply chain issue and the costs going through the roof at the moment. It can usually be installed quite quickly. It can offer resilience to the fabric of the building and also provide peace of mind to the residents that every time it rains, they're not going to be inundated by flood water or water coming off hard standing nearby. If housing haven't got the current finances to help deliver that, we can see if we can attract that through other funding streams, through the Environment Agency, local levy, the grant and aid. I'm personally on the the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee Financial Subcommittee, so I can help, maybe not influence that, but I can bring any proposal to the table and get other authorities and ourselves to vote on it. By all means, Councillor Huxtable, if you want to pass over further details on that, because I don't think personally I was aware that anyone had flooded in that area recently. So it'd be good if we can perhaps share information and see what can be done for these poor residents.
Chair, if I may on this, I wasn't aware of this either, and I am aware of some issues within the housing department that we could get resolved. So do liaise with me on this one. As far as the Cole strategic partnership goes, because it will involve Solihull, Worcestershire, and other authorities. One of the discussions that has been going on, that Hannah wasn't at the last Trent committee, but a proposal to use our data better was well received, and that's being dealt with by the Environment Agency. And I'm hoping that we can use the whole Cole catchment as well as the Ray catchment as subjects for looking at upstream measures.
I've just sent you the email, Hannah.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I'll have a look at that in a bit. Thank you.
Yes, so you can follow that up offline. And from my perspective, I mean, if you look back for the life of this committee over the 4 years of this of the council, here of the council since 2018, one of the first inquiries we did on this committee was to look at the impact of the flooding in 2018. So it's really great to see that the Selly Park North and South schemes have been completed and that people in that area are now protected from the quite significant devastation that they experienced after the extreme weather in 2018. And I also just wanted to say how much residents in my own ward have appreciated the work that you've done on behalf of leisure services on the Valley Parkway pool, otherwise known as the Bourneville boating pool. And I think it's completely transformed the environment there. So thank you very much for all the work that's been done there. Councillor Johnson-White.
Only just a very quick comment, and it was just really to say it's a shame that the stats aren't in for 2021 so that we can acknowledge the amount of work that's probably come into the department, because I think that would be really useful to see, but hopefully see that at some point. I won't be on the committee next time, but it would have been great to have seen and to acknowledge that. I just want to pass my thanks on because it was a really interesting report to read. I just want to sort of make the comment that I think as a councillor in the wards, well, I don't think we promote enough what it is that your department do and raise awareness, because I think if we could try and raise awareness in future years to ward councillors about how we can put our concerns and raise things to you, that would be really useful going forward. And if we could put that on record as to how we can do that, I think personally that would be a really useful thing going forward, because I think a lot of ward councillors don't probably appreciate that you're there and how to sort of move things, that any concerns that they have in your area. And certainly from reading that report, there's an awful lot of work happening out there that people and councillors don't really realise is happening, and you really do deserve a great deal of credit for that. And I just wanted to put that on record, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Johnson-White.
If I may, Chair, prior to COVID, we were discussing with the full council establishing a presentation outside full council. So if and when we get back to having in-person meetings, I would hope to be doing that.
Particularly with newer councillors maybe coming forward to raise awareness is really important.
I think that's a good idea, Tony. That's a good suggestion for the an early meeting in the new term of the new council where it's elected. But thank you very much. Are there any more questions at this stage?
No, I'd like to put on record my thanks to Hannah and her team as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll pass that on to the rest of the team because it's very much a team effort between ourselves and our contractors and working with our partners. But thank you.
Yeah, if Kenny was here, I'd probably ask him what's the timescale for recruiting to the post that you told us that's vacant that you're carrying. But maybe I'll take that to outside the meeting. But thank you very much. I think you picked up that we immensely enjoyed that presentation, and it's very good to know that you're there and helping the city improve its resilience against future flood incidents, but also just on the whole resilience for climate change. It's so important. So thank you very much, and we congratulate you and all your colleagues and all departments for the work that's been done in a very busy year. So thank you. Okay, that brings us to the end of the meeting. Sorry we've overrun slightly today. As Tim has pointed out, we have got another meeting in what I would call a sort of limbo period after the elections and before we have the annual meeting of the council. Can you remind me what the date of that is, Basima? 18th of May. So I mean, if I am lucky enough to be re-elected, then I'd be happy to attend that meeting. I'm sure Tim will as well, and everyone else is going to be joining us. And Councillor Leddy, I know Julie is retiring.
Standing down.
Retiring as a councillor. No, retiring as a councillor, I was going to say. But thank you for your input, and I'd like to say thanks to everyone who's been on this committee over the last 4 years. It's been a really interesting and great committee to participate in and chair. Councillor Freeman, you've popped up on the screen, so thank you for
thank you very much.
Participating virtually. And I really do feel that actually taking advantage of the flexibility that Teams offers us is really important. I wish the government would actually rethink its whole position on this. But on the other hand, it's great to come in and be able to talk to people face to face and have that interaction between all of us as colleagues. So thanks very much. On the work programme, I suppose it's more reviewing what we've done over the year and thinking about what we might want to discuss in that meeting as I say, in that period in May. So has anyone got any comments or observations on that? Apart from hoping that if you're seeking re-election, you're hoping that you get re-elected. So I wish everybody good luck in their election campaigns. So if there aren't any questions about the work programme, as we've already said, the next meeting will be on the 18th of May, and then it will be up to the new committee and whoever's chairing it need to set dates and times for the programmes for meetings in the next municipal year. And I think all the rest of this is now relevant, isn't it? I think apart from authority to act in between meetings if it's necessary. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, everybody. Lovely been working with you. Julie,
Yeah.
all the best for you. Bye. Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.
Yeah. And don't rule out becoming a councillor again.
I'm not. I might be better.